Okay, last part of this Facebook lecture. It's a slightly longer presentation, but I'm hoping I can bring this in around 20 minutes, just so it's not too long for you guys. Moving on from the concept of digital oil into more specifically surveillance and what that means for us as human beings. So surveillance and privacy is obviously a major concern when it comes to Facebook as a company, and we can extrapolate that out to other companies too. In particular, we have sort of ongoing concerns about the nature of surveillance and privacy on TikTok, for example, and where exactly that data is ending up. So the privacy of individuals using these platforms is a root cause of much of the consternation about them. And this really has been going on since these platforms sort of emerged in widespread use around 2007. Helen Nussbaum argues that the right to privacy is neither a right to secrecy nor a right to control, but a right to the appropriate flow of personal information. And clearly, in the Facebook world, we don't have that right. Surveillance on Facebook is surveillance of prosumers who dynamically and permanently create and share user-generated content, browse profiles and data, interact with one another, join, create and build communities, and coordinate information. This is not the surveillance of somebody looking at someone for a fixed period of time and looking at what they're doing. This is an ongoing, continual surveillance of everything that we do on a platform. Now, privacy is a major issue here, therefore. So Facebook is a typical manifestation of a stage of capitalism in which the relation of public and private and labor and play has collapsed, and which this collapse is exploited by capital, in this case the owners of Facebook. So as Hannah Arendt argued in 1958 in The Human Condition, the distinction between private and the public realms equals the distinction between things that should be shown and things that should not be hidden. And what has happened in the age of Facebook is that the realms of public and private have collapsed inwards on one another. Now there is no private, there is a hybrid of private and public where our private lives are played out in public. Facebook monitors, commodifies and uses all private data and user behavior. So users don't know exactly what happens with their data and to whom they're being sold to. And they don't know which parts of their life, be it private or public, is being consumed in that way. And even if we're careful in how we use social media, the tentacles of Facebook are such that they reach out into every part of our digital lives and pull in that information. So even by being circumspect in our use of a platform itself, that is not going to have a germane effect on how Facebook sees our activity. So Facebook usage private dimension is that individual users generate content, user-generated content. When this data is uploaded to Facebook or other social media, parts of it become available to a lot more people, whereby the data obtains a more public character. Here we see the private transforming into the public. The public availability of data can have both advantages and disadvantages. Job-related discrimination, stalking, etc. for users. So the private-public relation has another dimension on Facebook. Beyond this, privately generated user data and the individual user behavior become commodified on Facebook. This data is sold to advertising companies, as I've already been through in the last lecture. Facebook commodifies private data that is used for public communication in order to accumulate capital that is therefore privately owned. This is Fuchs' argument at the end of the last video. Users are excluded from the ownership of the resulting money capital, i.e. they are exploited by Facebook and are not paid for their creation of surplus value for the platform. Privacy selectively blown away in order to maximize profits. So where does that leave us? Facebook is a huge advertising, capital accumulation and user exploitation machine. Data surveillance is the means for Facebook's economic, and I can't see what word I've put at the end. That's a bit weird, isn't it? I don't know. Data surveillance is the means for Facebook's economic existence, quite frankly. Its economic endurance and ultimately its giant win. Data surveillance is how Facebook has become so huge. So how do we even reconcile this with our usage of platforms? Well, we need to get into it deeper even further. The intransparency of the company's use of personal data that is based on private appropriation of user data is the main form of privacy on Facebook. Facebook privacy is privacy for the company, not user privacy. You might think, what the hell are you talking about? Intransparency of the company's use of personal data. What does that mean? It means we don't have any idea how they use our data. We have no idea how they use our data or other people's data. We have no access to the algorithms used, and even if we did, we wouldn't be able to understand them. And what is interesting is, even if the programmers of the algorithms had access to them, they wouldn't be able to understand them, because these algorithms are amalgamations now of an algorithm here and an algorithm there. So the actual working of the system is opaque even to those who help put the system together. It's such a giant sort of AI powered machine learning tool now that even those who put together parts of it wouldn't be able to discern individually what is going on here. Facebook's privacy is privacy for the company. We don't know how it works. We have not been invited in. We can't see what it does with us, and that is deeply problematic. The prime oil for Facebook is the billions of identities they mine and get to know in ever greater detail. So the core, the business model, is the easy access to that core material. If people make it clear with their clicks, likes and postings that they hate certain things and love others, these people are really easy to sell to. And even if there are people out there who are using Facebook in a discerning manner, you know, really taking care to take care of their profile and, you know, even game the system in some ways, there are hundreds of millions who aren't, you know, and those are the key oil for this company. Michel Foucault argued that power is not only located in powerful bodies such as the state or companies, as you already know, of course, because you all read Foucault just for fun, right? Because Foucault is a fun guy. Look at the head on him. Power produces reality. It produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. The individual and the knowledge that may be gained of him belong to this production. Do you see how I'm going with this now with Facebook? The corporate platforms owned by Facebook not only strongly mediate the cultural expression of internet users, but are involved in the creation of our realities themselves. If we follow Foucault's logic on how power is distributed in society, power produces reality. It produces the domains of objects and rituals of truth. And in this sense, this is why Facebook's dominance, not just aside from knowing everything about us, is really, really problematic, because the individual and the knowledge that may be gained of him belong to this production of power. And Facebook is expert at gaining knowledge about us, but then it reproduces the world to us in a way in which that becomes the truth. That becomes the truth of things. It produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. Based on its knowledge of us, it presents the world in a particular way that we accept to be true. And I say we here in the general sense. Okay, some of us may not accept that to be, but the vast majority of us are actually still unquestioning in the face of this. What this means is we are undergoing a shift from the panopticon to the society of control. The panopticon was Bentham's system by which, you know, a prison was maintained by having a central lookout tower where you could see everything in the prison from one place. So, and the purpose of that was not just so that you could see everything, but that prisoners always thought that they could be being watched at any point in time. This exerts a power of control over you. We don't live in a panoptical system with Facebook. There is no guy at Facebook looking at what you're doing. Okay, nobody's there. Nobody's like going through a whole list of 1 billion users and think, Evans, L, right, I'm gonna have a look at this clown today. That doesn't happen. Nobody's ever done that. Instead, in the society of control, what has happened is that Facebook's continual aggregation of information is being replayed to us in suggestions for behavior that we do. And therefore, there is an element of control rather than of just pure surveillance. So big data systems such as Facebook greatly intensify the extent and frequency of monitoring people, shifts the logic from surveillance and discipline to capture and control, keep us in the system and push us in different ways. So there's a shift from Foucault's notion of disciplinary technology, such as the panopticon, to Deleuze's 1992 concept of technologies of control. And the controlled society is a dark place because we don't know who's controlling us or why. We know Facebook's aims, but we still don't know the how. You know, we don't know how they're achieving this. We're locked out from that knowledge. When we think of discipline versus control, now Foucault's notion of discipline as a mode of power positions discipline as a machine that works on a societal scale, and if you like, the state is a machine of control. All the things that it holds about us, documents, records, etc. The bureaucracy of the state works to control us in particular ways. So for Foucault, this produced power distributes individuals in a permanent and continuous field in which they self-discipline, actively managing their behaviour to comply with the expectations for fear of being caught transgressing and experiencing sanctions. And an element of the panopticon. Basically, the elements of the state are out there, you know, police, etc. And we learn these things and become self-disciplining so we don't get caught being bad people. Big data systems change the nature of observation from a model where an observer is needed. We no longer need to have an observer, to one where observation can be distant and performed by software. We become what Deleuze called an objectile, not a subject of self, but a construct of patterns of code that emerge from activity in the digitally infused world. Power through control of that objectile is achieved by the system. This is quantified. This is actually expressed in a number of different ways. For example, Lee Humphrey's notion of the quantified self is much along these lines. Social media are part of a long story of people cataloguing their lives, media accounting in different ways. For example, diaries and so on, right? But the efficiency and economic factors of social media are what we need to pay attention to, not the behaviors themselves, which are not new. We've always wanted to catalogue our lives in different ways, but what social media is doing is cataloguing it and quantifying it in particular ways in order for us to be sold as commodities. And the quantified self, therefore, becomes a commodity form in its own right. This all resonates with Schoenek's idea of platform economics and platform capitalism. But capitalism itself involved in a continual enrollment of new technologies to increase efficiencies and improve the process of capital accumulation. And really, Facebook and its ilk have, since the mid-2000s, been perfectly summed up in this way. New technologies which are used to increase efficiencies and improve the process of capital accumulation. As an advertising company, nothing has ever come close to it. So the word social associated with media assumes that platforms are user-centered and they facilitate communal activity, just as the term participatory emphasizes human collaboration. Social media can be seen as an online facilitator or enhancer. However, as a result of the interconnection of platforms, a new infrastructure has emerged, an ecosystem of connected media with few large and many small players, creating a platform sociality where those platforms become rich off the social behaviors that we actually perform on them. And this is what's known as platform economics. This also resonates strongly with notions of Californian ideology, and some of you may have encountered this if you did study in digital media with Reese. But the disruption caused by platforms such as Facebook in terms of privacy, disruption to democratic processes, and has often been conceptualized ideologically through Barbrook and Cameron's concept of the Californian ideology, which is understandable when you understand the Californian ideology. This has been thought of as the ideology of the techno-elite in Silicon Valley, a radical mixture of libertarian and the radical politics of the 60s counterculture. Now, as you formulate the Californian ideology, it can be expressed of, let me do what I want and don't tax me for it. And that sums up, you know, Bezos and Zuckerberg and the like pretty accurately, I think. You know, we don't want any rules to stop us from doing what the hell we want. Oh yeah, and we don't want to pay taxes either. In practice, that kind of ideology manifests itself in the forms of new media, where the ownership models are, and the ownership models of that new media, where vast profits are made from the exploitation of users, with a business model that avoids corporate tax and social responsibility attitude that avoids accountability. And this is an instantiation of what is happening here in the Californian ideology. Sometimes people get weird, when they think 60s counterculture wasn't like that. And 60s counterculture in this sense is, let me do what I want. And then libertarianism is don't tax me. In terms of the 60s counterculture, what we're talking about here is the ability to go against the interests of the state and create new sort of social relations within society, where it's not perhaps in line with 60s counterculture is those were generally seen as being positive movements. The ideological position on the operations of companies goes some way to explaining the vast data harvesting platforms on the Facebook platform, in like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, where user profiles were extensively analysed and targeted. What the Californian ideology does not emphasise, though, is the brutal instrumentalism of these platforms in conceptualising users. We are just made into raw materials. And I think when people talk about the Californian ideology as being the ideology of the ruling elite in Silicon Valley, they somehow miss out just how these people see us, which is lower than, sheep in a field. We are simply just raw material. We are like bits of coal to be dug out of the ground and burned, and to hell with the consequences. All of this fits within the wider context of what we call the attention economy. So Andrew Keane notes that the problem with the digital community in general is that it is dominated by a few companies, but critically the medium of exchange between these companies is the attention economy. This economy is a product of the use of products of these dominant companies itself. Now, the attention economy as a concept has been around for a very long time. Gary Becker was arguing in 1965 that time, not material goods, is the key scarcity in modern society. The attention economy is based on that fundamental principle. So basically, these companies are all about monopolizing our time. As much time as possible. Idle time. That time when we're sitting on the bus or waiting in a doctor's surgery and we have to wait for 5 minutes. What do? Well, they want it to be engaging with their product. It's all about engaging as much time as possible. And that controlling and creating attention then affords companies different possibilities. Like the A/B testing that Tanya Bucher wrote about in 2018. So a fraction of users are diverted to slightly different versions of a page in A/B testing, and their behavior is compared to the original group. If the behavior is better, that is, results in more clicks and likes, etc., the new replaces the old. These invisible experiments have become ubiquitous on the web, and especially ubiquitous within social media. It informs the Facebook algorithm and tells Facebook about the emotions and helps create the emotions of users itself. Facebook is involved in a giant experiment to manipulate your emotions to see what makes you buy more. And to hell with your emotional tenor. If being sad makes you buy more of a particular product, then it will send you information and pages and structure your feeds in a way that makes you sad in order to make you a more efficient consumer for a particular type of product. That should frighten you, that these companies, Facebook as a company is involved in emotional manipulation in order to improve its bottom line. But it is. If you want to find out more about Facebook and politics, I do recommend the Netflix film from 2019, about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, The Great Hack. Basically, Facebook sold and allowed access to millions of users to be selectively targeted with political messages, and it's well worth having a watch of this if you're going to pursue anything around these topics. That Cambridge Analytica scandal and the A/B testing and so on can fall under the title of PSYOPs, psychological operations, which are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, and groups and individuals. Cambridge Analytica used data to specifically identify undecided or manipulatable voters on both of those electoral occasions, and many others apart from that as well, then bombarded those people with tailored messages to persuade them to vote in the way that they were paid to make people vote. So Cambridge Analytica were hired by the Trump campaign, for example, so they were targeting people. They weren't doing this on both sides. This wasn't a benevolent action. All without the permission of the user, but facilitated by the architecture of Facebook, which means you don't need that permission because you have signed the terms and conditions, right? And Facebook are letting them do this. How do we conclude all this? I did say 20 minutes. I've got 70 seconds to get through this slide to make it 20 minutes. How good is that? Facebook are evil. The creation of and popularity of Facebook has created an entirely new model of economic activity based on surveillance. The culture of sharing is effectively a culture of commodity creation, with the commodity being you, my friend, and you being sold to advertisers based on continual surveillance of your digital media usage. And reflecting on that, in some way so at least in part 2 of your assessment could be quite powerful stuff, about, especially if you've done something around how much you use a platform and how much time you spend on a platform. You can think about how that time is commodified in particular ways. Thank you for listening, and delete Facebook.